book is categorical that external international issues may play a role, but never a decisive role, never the most significant role. It is always domestic forces that lead the process and determine whether that process succeeds or fails. And that reminds me of the great debate we were having in Condestria at the epoch, when Francophones, who have no understanding of democracy, as everybody knows, will always say, you know, that conference of La Baule, that's what set the African democratic process en route. Why are you looking at me? Primary role of domestic forces. I think the second definitive assertion in the book that I appreciate has to do with how you mobilize to achieve successful movement towards democratic transition. Here, what the book emphasizes is the importance of forging a national consensus. That the first key issue is for those mobilizing for democracy to convince the generality of the population that at this time in the history of the nation, the most important priority is that transition to democracy. So it's not a long list of 10 things that are all of equal importance. You must build that consensus. The concluding paragraph of the book, I think, tries to synthesize what the key findings are. It's an extremely important chapter because it tries to draw up a template of what you need to do to push your country towards successful democratic transition. The first of that finding that I find very important has to do with taking partial opportunities. If you are going to insist transitional arrangements must be perfect, you will find that you may never take off along that path. So they advise us in this template, if you have partial opportunities, seize them and use them to your best advantage to push the project forward. The second key finding I find very, very useful is to avoid maximalist positions. That is, how do you frame your demands? When you frame your demands, you of course include in it everything you want ultimately, but be conscious that you won't get everything you want ultimately at that initial phase. So be ready to scale down, as it were, your demand. The third finding I find extremely useful, and this is sometimes the intangible that's extremely important, is that of building a vision. That you need to have some inspirational leadership that can build that vision of where you want to go. And of course, in the process, inspire people to say, this journey is worth it. And this is more the practical finding is the importance of a constant process of creating spaces for dialogue. The final finding I find very, very important has to do with the process of constitutional making. And on that process also, the key elements drawn up in the template is the importance of a buy-in, that people must see that constitution as something they participated in, have a stake in. And I think this is really important because most constitutions that lead to successful transitions are not perfect. The only perfect constitution in the world is the South African Constitution, as everybody knows. And what they are saying in this template is not all of these constitutions have all the desired democratic content that you want, but accept it as something you contributed to developing and make use of it. The most important finding in this book, however, I looked for it, I scanned, and I didn't find it. And that finding is presidents, ex-presidents, have a historic mission to exaggerate the role they play in that democratic transition. And after all, their only purpose after power is that history remembers the good role they play. When reading this book, therefore, be very skeptical, be very suspicious of these people who have tasted and enjoyed power. Every time I speak, I talk about Alistair Cook, the late BBC journalist, who had this marvelous formulation that power does what? Power corrupts. And absolute power is what? Absolutely delicious. Power corrupts, absolute power is absolutely delicious. Having enjoyed that apple, if you think they are going to tell you the truth as it happened, you better think again. Since this Africa Day, let me conclude with our successful democratic transition in Africa. The third wave, as it is called in the literature, which we all know started with Benin 1989, where the National Conference emerged, the people seized power, they threw out Kereku, the dictator. Now, I don't remember they brought him back later, but that's not part of the narrative. But I think it had a huge impact in Africa. And within 5 years, 1989 to 1994, 43 African countries changed their constitution and adopted multi-party liberal democracy. And we all celebrated that democratic transition. The problem with democratic transition is that you always need to make a distinction between people who were dragged screaming and protesting into that transition and those where the forces on the ground were so strong that it was impossible to resist And in that context, I mean, not all presidents are stupid. The only real surprise in the third wave was really Benin. After that, they started getting wiser. The pressure was mounting, and so many of those presidents realized if you resist this new democratic constitution, the revolution may come. And
ladies and gentlemen, there we go. And we have had the reviewer making his input on the book itself. And we can now get into discussion if you have any issue to raise. Please feel free, there will be a roving mic. And then we can have our...
For that expose on this book. I am very keen now to read it. Political science being my area, and I've seen areas where I would contest. I would love to do that and critique this book. And maybe that will lead me to write my own story about African politics and African leadership. Because who celebrates you is important. And how are you chosen to be celebrated, and by whom? By the author. What are the characteristics of persons that are actually selected for interview and so on and whatever? That should really tell a story on its own. And then maybe we can replace some of the people, we can add a few, and so on. But it's been a very interesting synopsis of the book, a summary of the book. That was given by Professor Jibril. Thank you very much. But really, I'm serious about wishing to read this book. And maybe that will drive some of us to begin writing about our experiences and our own views, even if it's from a vantage point of view.
Il a beaucoup écrit sur l'univers, justement. Quelques années, on est plus actif dans ce domaine-là. Comment il apprécie le processus démocratique aujourd'hui, le changement devenu, cette dynamique nouvelle avec les nouveaux partis, avec une nouvelle vision d'un paysage politique? Donc, quel est son regard sur le Niger?
I will translate it. The relationship between transitional regime and the one who are taking power after the transition, because there is a new theory now in which power after transitional regime can become a threat for the stability of the system.
But I was trying to think about transition and how it also affects not only heads of states, but also civil society leaders. Jibril told me that he had stepped down from CBD, and we celebrated it.
Yeah.
But since then, I've seen a reverse transition where he had gotten back effectively. So, and as this man said, when you go back like that, you are more powerful than you were initially. I don't know what he has done is to stabilize DDP, or he's become corrupted by the sweetness of the power, I think, which is why he remains there. Thank you.
You were not the one that created it. And is it true that when you go on this journey of democracy, there are no expectations of the high quality? Because it's in mind from what you said that don't expect too much, don't drop anything. It's like the French principle, in the absence of nothing, what you have, you hold on to it, isn't it? And really, how do we come out of this kind of conundrum? You know, I don't understand. Because politics seems to be, I don't like to use this very bad terminology like prostitution. The more you give to it, the more you want to get out of it. You know, the very dirty game
Or is it really 10 or straight? Thank you very much.
I'm speaking. I want him when he was midway, but this is what I think. I mean, the idea that African political leaders, presidents get so addicted to the sweetness of power, and they do not want to go or they want to come back, may be true. But I'm looking at how leaders in other democracies, maybe more established, are transitioned where they are not made to idle, but all sorts of arrangements are made for them to be preoccupied and their experience is made more useful thereafter. If you take the US system, anybody serving in public office, when the term ends and they leave office, they are either, depending on the levels they are going to universities or think tanks or corporations and so on. And these are well catered for. These are mechanisms in place. Presidents have monies to set up their libraries and to define what they want to do, and they are assisted. I think that in Africa, probably what makes our leaders want to come back or not go is that there is nothing there. We do not plan. So you leave grace, you can leave grace to grass automatically, especially if your successors then have all the power to determine your future. And I think that it's a missing link that we should address.
Step forward beyond dictatorship progresses and being able to address these, including the gender and intergenerational dimensions, is one of the areas where I hope we'll be putting some more investment.
Look at those people, they are not listening.
This question woman, and this question.
Looking for transition?
No, it's no good. There is a second one. It could be more.